And welcome to my Life of Biz Wisdom for this week. I had some technical difficulties then with my iPhone, so I'm a little bit later in starting. But here I am, never fear. So what I want to talk to you about tonight is almost an introduction for what I think will actually be a number of Facebook Lives about procrastination. As a productivity coach, you can imagine procrastination is an issue that I talk to a lot of people about. It unfortunately is an issue that affects a lot of us. Some would say that we all procrastinate at some time or another, that it's part of our human condition. But what I tend to talk about mostly is for the times when it's actually becoming habitual. In fact, it's happening on a regular occasions to the point where it's actually holding the person back, whether that is in their business or in their lives generally. And often the way we do business is the way we do the rest of our lives, and vice versa. So if we procrastinate, we can procrastinate in some areas, and I'll talk more about why that might be. But as a general comment, particularly for people who, as I said, procrastination is habitual, it's a really big issue. It will tend to be in somebody's business or their work life if they're employed, as well as in other areas of their lives as well. So what is procrastination? I better talk about how I define it to begin with. And you've probably got a pretty good idea, as I said, because most of us tend to do it at some point or another, or we know somebody who does. And so the way that I describe procrastination is the time delay between when we intend to do something, and that's an important point, the intention of doing something, and when we actually do it, or in fact don't do it at all. Because it could be either. So that intention might be that we schedule a time to do something and we don't do it at that time. Now, of course, there can always be legitimate reasons, and that actually makes me think of or remember Facebook Lives I've done in the past which is where I'm talking about the difference between reasons and excuses. So there definitely can be very rational reasons, there's an emergency or something like that. The thing is, though, they will often be few and far between. What I'm talking about is a time delay where there aren't legitimate reasons, and they tend to be more the excuses. So those excuses can be things like, oh, I don't feel like it now, I'll do it later. There's going to be time later. Or, oh, I don't feel well, I feel really tired. Or, I haven't got everything organised yet. I have to get a bit more organised with some stuff before I can do it. I'm not ready yet. How many times have you said to yourself you're not ready yet? Or you've heard other people say. And I know about this stuff because I've done this myself. I don't teach or coach in areas that I haven't experienced for myself. This has been so much my own journey. And, there's that saying that we teach what it is we most need to learn. And I think for a lot of us in coaching or healing in whatever way, it's our own life experience that has led us to want to actually specialize in these areas. And that's certainly been the case for me in areas such as procrastination. So, as I said, there's this delay between when we intend, we plan, we schedule, we might say to people that we're going to be doing something at a certain time and we don't. We can say to ourselves, as I was just alluding to, that we're going to do something at a certain time and we don't. So it's, as I said, it's when there's the excuses coming up, not so much, not the legitimate reasons. So there's the delay in the time. And of course that delay can be a short period of time, or in fact it can be, as I said, we never do it, or there's actually quite a really long time. It could be, hours, days, weeks, months, years. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. So that's obviously bringing stuff up for me as I'm talking, because I believe that coughing like a lot of our bodily functions, has a message for us. So, interesting. I'll have to reflect on that one later. Anyway, so there is this time delay, and it can be variable, as I just said. So what I want to focus on tonight is really honing in on what are the main reasons that we procrastinate. Because I believe that when you have an understanding, a good understanding of why you procrastinate, it's the start of what then might shed some light on what you can do about it. I'm utterly fascinated in human behaviour and in issues like, or problems like, procrastination and clutter, amongst a whole lot of others in the whole realm of productivity. It's my absolute passion. As I said, I find it utterly fascinating. And so I've delved into a lot in regards to understanding why do people procrastinate. And as I said, create clutter and a whole lot of other areas. So in regards to the areas, in regards to the reasons why we procrastinate, I'll go through those now. The one comment I want to make, though, just to start off with, that sort of frames all of this, is that the underlying reason why we procrastinate is because we want to avoid something that we believe is going to be uncomfortable in whatever way. It could be painful. It could be that we're scared about it. There's fear. And I'll go into some concrete examples of what that might be, and you'll be able to pick that up in the various reasons that I'll go through. But that's the underlying thing that joins all of these reasons together, that underpins all of these reasons. And we have this human tendency to actually want to avoid pain or discomfort or unease more. We're motivated by avoiding that than we are going towards behavior that we actually really like doing or that we think is good for us in terms of what is called in NLP terms, if you're familiar with that, which is neuro-linguistic programming. It's the moving away from that motivates us, in this case, discomfort, unease, than the moving towards. So, which might be the benefits of what we actually do end up doing if we do the thing. And of course, that actually brings up an important point. Sometimes, in fact, there's 2 points I'll make with that before I start to go into the reasons in detail. Sometimes we procrastinate, and it's actually okay. It doesn't matter so much. I think we can actually beat ourselves up a lot if we have this tendency to procrastinate. And if you followed me at all, then you will know that I'm not into beating ourselves up. It's just a waste of energy, and it erodes our self-esteem. So what I suggest then is looking at it from a point of view of self-compassion. And I'll talk about how you can do that with procrastination in another video. So some things really don't matter. It's like that don't sweat the small stuff. But as I said at the start of the video, if you find this is happening frequently, and of course, if it's procrastination of the things that could really propel your life, that's when it's an issue. Now, the other point I want to make is that sometimes, and I actually did a video on this a little while ago, sometimes what might appear to be procrastinating is actually what I call percolating. I just love that word, percolating. And percolating is when you actually need some time to let things simmer or percolate, as in giving it some more thought. And what I love to do is actually give it to the universe and say, or just set that intention that and particularly in my unconscious mind or in my subconscious mind, I'm going to really work through this, and my creativity and my intuition will give me perhaps the next step or some ideas, particularly if it's a problem, how to go about solving it or getting around it. So not all procrastination is bad. However, as I've said, if it's stopping you to progress in your life, and if it's happening habitually, and there are negative consequences of you procrastinating, then that's when something needs to be done about it. So getting back to these main reasons why we tend to procrastinate. The first one is that we feel overwhelmed. So how many times have you sat down, for instance, maybe a lot of paperwork, to do with paperwork or something, and it's a case of, oh my God, I just don't know where to start. Oh, where do I start? And that sense of overwhelm really, really can be crippling, because we literally sometimes don't know where to begin. So it might be, for instance, if you're at home, if I think of the clutter example, perhaps you're in your teenager's, using this example, your teenager's bedroom, and you've got to go, there's so much stuff. And, your teenager is either with you or not with you, whatever. And it's like, oh my God, there is mess everywhere. Where do we begin? And that can be literally overwhelming. It's a little bit like, or sorting through papers, as I was talking about. It can be like, for instance, in your finances, in your business, if you haven't kept up with them, and if you don't have good systems and processes in place, it can come, tax time, or if you're registered for GST, BAS time, and in Australia, and it's like, oh, I'm going to have to go through months and months of figures. Maybe you've got, printed stuff as well as electronic stuff, and it's like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know what to do about this. And if we don't know the next step, if we don't know the first step or the next step, that is when we would tend to procrastinate. So there's some examples with that one, feeling overwhelmed. So as I'm talking about these reasons, I'd love you to consider how these might relate to you. Do you ever do this, or the others that I'll talk about? Or do you know somebody who does? Or maybe you do some of them some of the time and others at other times. So first one is the feeling of overwhelm. The second reason for procrastinating can be that we have a lack of focus. Now, it's related to the overwhelm. But when we have a lack of focus and we're distracted, and that can happen for all sorts of reasons and show up in all sorts of ways, it can mean that the end result of a lack of focus is that we procrastinate. So if I think of an example that if I'm not careful, I can fall into, and I dare say I'm not the only one, is this idea of having to post on social media as part of promotion in our groups, and going on Facebook, and that news feed just almost, unless we're really, really conscious of it, can just draw us in. And how often have you had this happening where you went on to Facebook for a specific reason? As I said, if you're in your business, then it's perhaps promoting, as I said, your services or something like that. And so you want to go on, for instance, your business page, but you're stuck in the news feed. And because you've got a lack of focus, as in focusing on the posting on the business page, it can result in the procrastination. That's what actually ends up. And of course, procrastination can happen at unconscious level. We're not even consciously aware of it a lot of the time. And the more that we do this, unfortunately, it creates a habit. Repeated behavior becomes habitual, whether it's positive behavior or behavior that doesn't serve us. So a lack of focus can actually be a reason for or lead to procrastination. Another one can be a lack of motivation. So if we're not motivated to do something, then it's quite possible that we'll put it off, and therefore we can procrastinate with it. And when I talk about motivation, I'm specifically talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is motivation from other people or other things outside of ourselves. So it could be a deadline. That's a great motivator. It certainly is for me. I know I need a lot of accountability, and I'm okay with that. I've come to terms with that. That's just the way I am. And so having a deadline means that I'm motivated to do it. Mightn't mean that I absolutely love it, but I'm motivated to do it. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is motivation that we've created for ourselves internally. And a good example of this is, what is our purpose, either in our lives or for doing something in our lives or in our business, or our business purpose. For a lot of us in business, particularly if we're in creative and spiritual businesses, or we're coaches or healers, or in the arts areas, then we have a lot of intrinsic motivation because it's our passion, it's our purpose in life, often personally as well as professionally in our businesses. Now, if we lack that motivation for whatever reason, it can lead, it's like the not having the spark that then literally motivates us, that then gets us going to get into that frame of mind and to really get that energy happening, because that's what it is. It's an energy build-up, the motivation, a bit like a firecracker being lit. So if we don't have that, it can lead to motivation, a lack of motivation and procrastination. Another one also is that we consider what it is that we're procrastinating about to be really to be uncomfortable in some way. As I was saying, this is a general theme for all of them, but we might consider what we've got to do as boring. Could be complicated, although that might then relate more to the being overwhelmed reason. But if we just stick with the boring or, just not very interesting. And if I think of the example of, I can think of housework, for instance. It could be the ironing or the vacuuming or something like that, or cleaning the bathroom, whatever. I can think of a million examples like that. How easy is it to put something off if we don't think it's going to be enjoyable, if it's boring? I mean, that, I think we can all relate to, can all think of examples with that happening. So the trick is to try and add more oomph to it to make it more fun, but I'll talk about that more in another video. But it's a reason and it's understandable. Like I said before, we are motivated more about, we want to avoid what we consider is pain or discomfort, in this case, perhaps boredom. So it makes sense that we would want to avoid that. Another area is a fear of failure. Now, this is something that a lot of us can relate to. Not everybody, but a lot of us. Enough for it to be an issue. And particularly, say, in using the example of course, all of us in business, the fear of failure can actually be behind us getting ourselves out there and promoting our services, for instance. Or if I think about a personal example, if I want to start, for instance, something new, like learning a new skill, thinking of dancing classes or something like that. And if I'm actually quite scared, whether that's conscious or not, if I'm quite scared about actually failing, then that can be enough for me to procrastinate on it. And often that is very much tied to perfectionism. If we suffer from perfectionism, and that's a whole other great big area, but if there's the link here, if we suffer from procrastination, from perfectionism, it can mean that we've got this fear of failing, this fear of being judged, of being imperfect, this fear of being imperfect. And this idea that we can't, if we don't do it, then we're not going to fail. But of course, often those very things that we are procrastinating on, that we have a fear of failure with, are the things that actually are going to enrich our lives and potentially the lives of other people around us, whether it's professionally or personally. So it's actually really sad. And It's something that I work a lot with clients about, and it's an area that can really, really slow a lot of us down and impact us negatively. And often there's unconscious things happening there, and particularly if we've often, not always, but often it started in childhood, where there's some decision or a limiting belief that we've created about what it will mean if we fail, inverted commas, whatever that means, and therefore the need we have to avoid it. So that's the fear of failure. Another one, which is ironic in some ways because it's absolutely the opposite, but just as potent, is this fear of success. And I never used to think I never thought that was a thing. When I started to learn about it, I thought, oh no, I don't have that. I've got fear of failure. I actually realized over time that I had both. And that was a reason why I said before, I've got my own personal history with procrastination. And these were some really big reasons why. So with the fear of success, what it means is that it's not a fear of making mistakes and failing. It's that fear of what is it going to mean for us if we are successful. Now, obviously can be defined in all sorts of different ways. And you might want to, if you're reflecting on this, and I really hope that you do, have a think about what that means for you, either in your own business or in your life generally. What does success mean for you? It could mean something for you in terms of in relation to your family and friends, in relation to your business. And for me, I know it's been very much in relation to my business and putting myself out there again. Not, as I said, because in this case of fear of failure, but what is that going to mean? Does that mean I have to be on all the time? Do I have to be always on social media? And I'm actually an introvert. And I don't actually love being out there all the time. I can do it for periods of time, but it exhausts me, and then I want to go away from that. So part of my fear of success has been, am I going to have to be on, so to speak, all the time? Am I going to have to be on and really being out there in terms of, say, promoting my businesses, whether it be live events or social media or whatever? Does it mean that it's going to be more hard work? Does it mean I have to work 24/7 or nearabouts? Do I really want that? Does it mean that if I'm busy, using that word I don't like, now, how much busier am I going to be if I'm really successful? And on the surface, these questions make a lot of sense. But really, it doesn't mean if we're successful that we have to work more, that we're more busier, that we can't take breaks and have some sort of control, some parameters around that. But until we work through that sort of beliefs that we have, getting an understanding of them, until we can actually counter these beliefs, we can definitely procrastinate. And I know I have, with regards to a fear of success. And I ask you, is that something that you've thought of before? It reminds me of that phrase, the glass ceiling. You know, that can actually be, it definitely is a thing, and it can be something that unconsciously, if we hit this glass ceiling, in other words, the level that we think that we deserve, which is what it is, then that actually, a way that we can then sabotage ourselves is actually procrastinating. That's one way. There's lots of other ways, but that can be one way. So I'll just recap these reasons again. So a fear of overwhelm, a lack of focus, a lack of motivation, a fear of failure, a fear of success, and if we think something is too boring, too hard or too boring. So there's 6 reasons, and I really do encourage you to reflect on Which ones of those do you tend to do, particularly the ones that you indulge in a lot? Again, whether it's conscious or unconscious, but really, I've said this before, I'm such a big proponent of sitting, being centered, go within yourself and ask you these questions, meditate. Ask yourself these questions. Set the intention that your inner wisdom will let you know, will give you some insight. And as I said, it's not to beat ourselves up with, it's not to judge ourselves. It's about giving ourselves some ideas, some insight, as I said, into why we do it. And then we have more knowledge to then start to counter it. So as usual, please, any comments you have, post them below here. And any questions, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with procrastination. Unfortunately, it is a huge problem for a lot of people. And it doesn't have to be. It is something that we can work on, that you can get over. And I'll talk more about that in future videos. So I hope that you've got something out of tonight. As I said to begin with, when we understand why we do things, that can be the start of understanding how we can overcome them. So with that, I will leave you. I will wish you a gorgeous rest of your day, and I so look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye for now.